Hello, I'm Mark DeLuzio. Over the past century, our constitutional republic, grounded in the rule of law, has been transformed into a tyrannical democracy, orchestrated by unelected bureaucrats and globalists. The Constitution is now treated as a suggestion, not the law of the land. Welcome to the Constitution Solution, one podcast under God.
Hi, I'm Mark's co-host, Suzette Lawrence. Our intention is to explore the Constitution and discuss how our freedoms and constitutional rights are violated by those very politicians who took an oath on the Bible to uphold it. Learn how the Constitution is the solution to our country's problems. What do we need to do to restore our inalienable and enumerated rights? Class begins now.
Hi, Mark DeLuzio here with Suzette Lawrence. How are you doing, Suzette, today?
I'm doing great, Mark. I'm excited to talk about the flag burning issue.
Well, it's an emotional thing, isn't it? I mean, we're going to talk about flag burning. We're going to talk about the ruling that was made back in 1990. A 5-4 decision in terms of saying that, hey, flag burning is banning flag burning would be against your First Amendment rights. And there's a lot of emotion around this. And we're talking about the U.S. flag, right? And we know that there's a lot of protocol around flags, right? In terms of how you handle them, lighting them at night. There's all kinds of things that we have developed over the course of time in terms of what flags are all about. They drape our caskets of our veterans, our police, our fire. They have a lot of meaning and a lot of emotion. And you did a little research, Suzette, on flags too. Maybe a brief overview about how did we get this flag and how did it come to be the way it is today?
Well, thanks for asking about the history of the flag. So right around the Boston Tea Party, with the Sons of Liberty were in Boston, and they were protesting the Stamp Act. The Stamp Act was an act, the first tax that Britain had imposed on the colonists. And it was on printed materials, things like documents, papers, pamphlets, cards, etc. So the Sons of Liberty were very angry about this and were protesting it. And the call came to Colonel Washington, who was in Philadelphia, and they asked him to lead the militia in Boston at Boston Heights to fight the British. And we had not declared independence at this point. We did not have a flag. So he took 2 flags with him, and one of the flags was what they called the Continental. And the Continental had 13 red and white stripes, which was the Sons of Liberty. That was their flag. It was just 13 horizontal red and white stripes for each colony. And in the corner of that flag was the Union Jack. And essentially, Colonel Washington said, this will not do. Because here's the thing, you're going into battle. The purpose for carrying the flag is to identify yourself. And this was like, we're not fighting for the king, we're like fighting against him. Even though red, white, and blue were considered the king's colors. So that's how the flag began. There were many iterations since then. What we now have is our official flag that I believe President Taft confirmed this is our flag. And every time we add a state, we'll add a star, a 5-pointed star. So that's how we got our flag. And there were many flags in between. So if you ever see one, get it.
Hey, by the way, I have a friend that I met on the campaign trail. His father has arguably the biggest memorabilia collection, political collection in the world. And he has over 12 million artifacts. One of his prized possessions is he has the flag of the George Washington inaugural when he gave his speech, when he got inaugurated. He has that flag. Can you imagine that? They probably just left it there, like the baseball at Fenway Park that went through Bill Buckner's leg, a famous baseball in the World Series. and it just stood out in right field. Nobody went to pick it up. Right? Yeah, they probably just left the flag up there, and somebody came along and said, "Hey, I'm going to take the flag." Right? No big deal, right?
That
uh,
is so
and I
wild.
can't imagine what that's worth. But well, thanks for that, Suzette. Excuse me. There's a lot of emotion around the flag, of
Oh,
course, right? And we're talking about Suzette, help me out. It was 1990, correct? That we had a 5-4 decision on the flag burning, Texas versus Johnson.
I believe it was 1990.
With the
Yes.
background, yeah, and Judge Scalia, Anton Scalia, God rest his soul, to me, probably one of the best jurists we ever had on the court, um, ruled in favor of allowing flag burning per your First Amendment rights. And he had a quote. You and I were talking about this earlier, Suzette. Um, he said that if it were up to me, I would put in jail every scandal wearing, scruffy bearded weirdo who burns the American flag. He said that in November 2015 in Philadelphia. And he said, but I'm not king.
Well, and this is what it came down to, that what the Supreme Court argued at this point. At that point, it was, I guess, Johnson versus Texas was the case, and
Right.
Mr. Johnson had burned a flag outside of the Republican convention, and he was arrested. He went to jail. He was fined $2,000. He had a year in
Yep.
jail, I think. And he appealed the case, and the Supreme Court heard it. And what they said was that burning the flag was an expression of his speech, his First Amendment right. It was
Right.
symbolic of speech. And they felt like they couldn't ban it or censor burning the flag because flags in reverence were burned or buried when they were worn out. And this was now became a point of view. Oh, you can burn the flag because of this, but you can't because of that. If there had been a different way to dispose of flags, then there wouldn't have been an exception. But they said they couldn't make an exception because we were already burning flags, but we were burning them in reverence to retire them, not
And I
in
don't know if people
defiance.
know that if they want to get rid of a flag, a lot of your American Legions and your VFWs periodically will have a flag burning weekend, let's say, where you could bring your old flags down that are torn and what have you, to be properly disposed of, right? Although I do think, though, that Scalia, I don't think that I don't think the vote would have been any different if let's just say, for example, we allowed flag disposal in another fashion, not burning, let's say, and it doesn't matter what the other method was; it was not burning. I think they still would have ruled the same way because, and I would agree with that, by the way, because it still is an expression of and I guess you think about this and you say to yourself, well, how distasteful this is, though. The easy thing to say would be it should be illegal, right? And you look what Scalia said. I throw all these guys in jail. He said, but he had the belief and the understanding of the Constitution to say, hey, look, if I allow this one to go through, what else that are you going to consider distasteful? That is your right to say, but somebody doesn't like what you say. Now you're starting to legislate speech.
Exactly,
It was
Mark.
brilliant. It was absolutely brilliant.
The point of speech is to broaden the marketplace of ideas. If we can't talk to
Right.
each other about issues diplomatically, I'm not,
Mhm.
in debate, if we can't talk to each other, how are we going to solve problems? How are we going to find the truth if we can't talk to each other? And I
Yeah.
think that's what Justice Scalia, where he was going with this, is you have to allow speech, you have to allow the exchange of ideas. This is part and parcel to who we are as a nation. And that's kind of where an important component of our First Amendment right. The opposite of that would have been censorship. And
Right.
censorship is a tool of tyrants. I'm sorry, it's weak people fearful of the truth.
But
Because
Suzette,
when
censorship doesn't happen in our country. What are you talking about?
oh my goodness. It's a it doesn't have to happen. It doesn't happen at my house. And it doesn't happen in my conversations. I love being around free people that don't feel the need to censor themselves. There's nothing sadder than watching somebody scrambling for words because they're afraid they'll offend you. I was just having coffee with my neighbors, and my neighbor started to say something, and he stopped, and I said, use your words. Don't be afraid. You can't offend me, and he did. And it was really kind of that moment of, this is how we learn from each other. This is how we discover truth. I really do believe that.
Well, we have defamation and slander laws too. Okay, so there are, if your speech does cause somebody harm, yeah, there's laws against that. I was telling you offline before we started, Suzette, how my son Steve, before he got killed, went to a funeral of, I believe, the soldier he was going to replace, and one of the protesters at this soldier's funeral held up a sign that said, "A good soldier is a dead soldier." Okay, I mean, you can't get too much more distasteful than that. But as distasteful as that is, they had a right to hold that sign up, right? Um, and like Scalia said, if I was king, I'd throw him in jail. But but that's our
And
country. You cannot do things like that in almost any other country in this world.
and the beauty of that story is the response to their speech were these patriotic guard riders,
Patriot Guard riders, yes,
patriot guard
yes,
riders who also came to this soldier's funeral and created a barricade with their bikes
yes, they did.
peacefully between these protesters and the families of the people that were coming to that funeral. So they also were able to express their
Yep.
symbolic
By the way,
speech.
they revved up their Harley so that you couldn't hear their shouts.
Chanting.
Okay. Yeah. And well, and again, I'll just finish the story because I told you when Steve called me and said, God, Dad, you don't believe these Patriot Guard riders are great people and what they did and all this, right? So when Stephen got killed, I asked our crisis assistance officer, I said, hey, do you think we can get the Patriot Guard riders to show up at his funeral? And my crisis assistance officer from the Army, he said, Mark, they already told us they're going to be there. and there were 93 of them, by the way. 6 of them, I think, were in wheelchairs. A lot of these guys are Vietnam vets.
Wow.
6 in wheelchairs, and the rest on Harleys. And they formed a big line, and his thousands of people at his funeral. But these guys formed this unbelievable, little plug for the Patriot Guard riders because they're phenomenal, a phenomenal group of individuals. Um, you know, one of the things that happened so again, the whole thing, Suzette, you and I were speaking about, be careful what you ask for, right?
Mhm.
Because it's so easy to say, hey, look, yeah, I want to ban flag burning. We should make that illegal. But you go down now and look at the different things that have happened relative to our Constitution and where emotions, and come on, as you said, there's a lot of emotion around a flag. Okay.
Oh,
People die
yes.
for it. And again, we put it on caskets of firemen and police and veterans and all that, presidents. So a lot of emotion around the flag. But let's look at where emotion got us when we said, well, geez, Constitution doesn't matter. And as much as I love President Trump did not have the right to raise tariffs against China. Okay, that is an enumerated right of Congress, one of the 17 enumerated rights in Article 1, Section 8. The president can't just arbitrarily say we're going to raise tariffs on China. Okay, that's Congress's job. When FDR interned 120,000 Japanese citizens in World War II, I'm sorry, American citizens that were Japanese in World War II. Nobody really pushed back on that because the emotion against the Japanese at that time was unbelievably negative, right? So it happened, okay?
And the
Going
Germans,
and
and
the
the
Germans,
Germans. There was no picnic regarding Germans either. They were sent to camps in
you
the
know,
US.
when you've got these emotions going, how about this one? Going way back when to the founders, the Alien Sedition Act, where one of the provisions of that act was to make it illegal to criticize the government. John Adams was all for that. Okay, the Federalist Party was all for banning any negative writings or speech against the federal government. Okay, well that got eliminated by Congress in the next session, and Thomas Jefferson was one that really led that charge and said, "No, this is wrong." Okay, we got to allow people to criticize the government. So even though we have these rights that are spelled out in our Constitution, or I should say, the Constitution really is a restraint on the government to infringe our rights. It still happens. Okay, it still happens. Now I want to go back to Canada, where Dr. Jordan B. Peterson, if you follow him at all, his claim to fame was when he pushed back against Canadian government. When the Canadian government, and he said this is kind of the first time he ever saw this happen, made it illegal with a jail term if you did not call somebody their proper preferred pronoun. Okay, so they put that into law. Now, according to him, this really wasn't about speech. This was about control. And this was about the Canadian government just moving forward with further measures after this one to be able to control you. Okay. And I think he was right. So this is the slippery slope that happens with these infringements where we allow one, hey, I think flag burning should be illegal. Okay, well, what happens when something else gets banned that you don't believe in? Okay. It's a slippery slope.
It is, and I think you bring the excellent point that the Constitution is a restraint on the government against
Right.
the people. And it's general for a reason, because they didn't want to have to list everything the government couldn't do, right? There's that's why it's general in scope.
Hmm.
For that very reason. And I think the speech issue, in the same way that a man can burn a flag, you can also you can rise up as a defender of speech and use your words wisely, get smarter, get better at using your words to defend yourself or to respect his right to do it, even though you may not respect him. Or, it's you're respecting the right that the court has said. It was a tight decision. It was a 5-4 decision. So it was very tight, but that fifth vote counted, and that's how it is. And because of that, groups like the Patriot Guard writers
Hmm.
can come to the rescue they go to these funerals for a reason. They go, to show their respect, but also to protect families. They're
That's
there.
right.
They're there they know why they're there. And I think that's I think that's beautiful, because that's a really high frequency response to a low frequency assault, to actually stand at someone's funeral and say ugly things in protest, as opposed to going to the people who start the wars. If you want to protest a war, go to Washington or go to Raytheon or go to the UN. But,
Well, you make a really good point because, when you really look at another infringement on our Constitution is that all of these attacks on, what we're doing today with Iran and with Iraq and with Syria and with Yemen and all these attacks, we got these pundits on TV saying, well, it's not really a war. Well, when is it a war? You look at Webster's 1828 dictionary, it's a war. Okay. And
Ask
by
the people
definition,
who you're bombing who haven't had water in 3 months, whether it's a war or not.
yeah,
You know,
like I
the
said in the
people,
previous episode,
yes.
you shoot at me, it's a war. You're attacking
I
my
mean,
country.
I know
Okay.
these guys are nuts. I think, well, these guys are nuts. These guys are in business. I think they've made that very clear. Jordan, this latest foray where we shot missiles into Syria and
Right.
Iraq, okay? And they said because someone shot a drone into this guard tower 22, which they said was in Jordan, but Jordan did not say that happened. Jordan denied that happened in Jordan.
Well,
Isn't that
look,
interesting?
you
So
can't believe
there's,
anything. The Bay of Tonkin for Vietnam didn't happen either, but Johnson
I
lied
know,
to us in Congress. Here's the other thing. We went after it because we're using the excuse we're avenging our 3 soldiers that got killed there. But what about the 13 that got killed in Afghanistan? Why didn't we go after the Taliban then? Okay. It's all BS, and it goes back to let's see, episode 9, Suzette, we did way back when with Christie on the military industrial complex. That's something I'd
mhm.
ask you guys to go listen to. All these things tie together, by the way. It's interesting. We did one on enumerated powers, which was episode 5, and Suzette, you mentioned earlier the Stamp Act. That was episode 10 that we covered that in an earlier episode. So all these things we're covering, and you're going to start seeing that all of these different issues, whether it's the enumerated powers or nullification, if we're republic versus democracy, the fourth branch of government, all these are Venn diagrams that touch each other. They all relate to each other, right? The
Yeah,
Communist Manifesto, okay? And it's all about fighting to keep our sovereignty, to keep the government, the bigger the government, the more infringe our rights. Okay, there's an inverse relationship there, right? Or
yes,
proportion.
Ron Paul, many of you, of course, if you're a constitutionalist, you love Dr. Paul. And when he was running, he said the way you get rid of all these alphabet agencies is you just put a hiring freeze on.
You don't fund them. Yeah.
And as people, you stop funding them, you stop hiring, you don't have to get rid of any of them right away. You just stop funding the hiring. And then you start moving people around. As people retire out of this department, you move somebody from that department into this department because these people are not committed to a mission. They have really great government jobs in Washington are sought after. Best insurance, best hours, best money.
Right.
These are really good jobs. So you just like through attrition, you would one by one be able to knock out these agencies without the people protesting. Now your donors would go crazy. Of course, the teachers union would have a cow, but he wouldn't have cared about them.
If I was president, I'd be a lot more aggressive than that. I wouldn't let attrition take its course because in 4 years you're going to get some other crack job president that's going to do the opposite. But let me go through. We talked about one of these, Suzette, earlier in a previous episode, back with Christy, and we talked about smoking. Okay, again, this all goes back towards the notion of be careful what you ask for. Okay, if you let your emotions trump the Constitution, sooner or later that's going to come around and bite you. Okay, and I use smoking as a great example. As you know, I hate smoking. I never tried it. My parents smoked when I was a kid. And my sister and I, my twin sister, would be in the back seat of the car in the winter with the heater on and the windows rolled up, and we gagging and our smoke. It smelled, and I just hated smoking. So I never, even as a teenager, tried it. Okay, I had a lot of friends that wanted to smoke or did smoke. I never even tried it. I was so distasteful. But and I wouldn't go into a place that had a lot of smoke, right? But as much as I hate smoking, I reject the government telling a bar owner or a restaurant owner that you can't allow smoking in your establishment. Let the free market dictate. If you have a restaurant or a bar that has a bunch of smoke in it, guess what? Mark DeLuzio doesn't go. Okay. Now, maybe he's going to fill that bar up with all kinds of people who want to smoke, and he's going to make a lot of money. Fine. I know it's unhealthy. I know it kills people, but so does alcohol. So does driving your car. We lose 40,000 people a year in that regard, 12 million injuries a year. So where do you draw the line as to what the government's going to allow, especially when it's an illegal, it's a legal substance, okay, as is alcohol, as is driving your car, okay. When are you going to draw the line where you say, well, that's okay to ban, but that's not okay to ban? What's going to happen when, if your BMI is over 30 and you go to the grocery store and you have a card and it says, oh, no, those Pringles you can't buy. That half gallon of ice cream, no, you're not allowed to buy that because you're over 30 and you're harming our society and you're costing insurance companies money. And, you know, uh, be careful what you ask for, you know? So going back to flag burning, be very careful. Yep.
Yeah, what I would add to that is that we talk about our rights, our constitutional rights,
Right.
but with that are our constitutional responsibilities.
That's right.
We're asked to be thinking people, responsible, to protect ourselves, protect our health, protect our families. This is, I think, part and parcel to being American. We don't have Big Daddy taking care of us. Nobody's coming to rescue us. We have to rescue ourselves. That's why we're here, addressing these issues and talking about them. And I think smoking is one of those, whether you even want to eat in a restaurant, every wellness program that you begin, if you have an honest person in front of the room, an honest, professional, wellness oriented person, the first thing they'll tell you is the best habit you can develop is no more restaurant food. It's the first thing they tell you. And this is very
Except wait a minute, except Big Macs, right? You wouldn't take those from me, would
you? You and President Trump.
I heard they're good for you.
Yeah, all 800 calories.
I read it on the internet. It has to be true.
Oh, did you? Did you get it at Wikipedia? Wikipedia, the new brain trust for wellness.
Wait a minute. It was posted by some guy named Abraham Lincoln. Okay. I swear to God, it's on the internet. It's got to be true. But it's a good point. It's a good point. Yeah, but that's your choice, right? And
it is. See, and this is
right.
what it comes down to, it is our individual choice, and we do have that option. So we can decide, where do I want to eat? What am I going to eat? What am I going to smoke? What am I not going to smoke? Am I going to drink? Am I not, am I going to drink alcohol, whatever.
Look, hey, Suzette, you and I talked a lot offline about COVID, right? And what happened there. And we had a couple episodes with Christy on COVID. We probably should have more to get your medical perspective on it in the future, because you have a view that is different than I think your average person. But, Ben Franklin said, so when everybody was saying, hey, you got to stay indoors and you got to wear a mask and you got to get vaccinated, and nobody thought about individual freedoms or choices at the time because emotion was so high. Quite frankly, the press and the government together scared the bejesus out of people. Okay.
Oh, they're very good at propaganda. Very good. This was a propaganda campaign to beat the game.
And by the way, just to let you know, Pfizer is the fourth largest defense contractor. Okay, out of top 10. They're the fourth.
I do want to talk about this at some point, because there's some very interesting manipulations that were done during that entire period that were very well orchestrated, very well planned.
Well, let's do it. We should put that on the docket, okay? Because I think people have to start challenging all of these things and not let emotions trump your freedoms. And I'll go back to our friend Ben Franklin. He said, anybody, and I'll paraphrase, who is willing to give up a little bit of safety for a little bit of freedom deserves neither. And that's exactly what happened during COVID. Yeah.
There's nothing that you could do that's worse for a person during an epidemic than to lock them in their house.
My God, no, no, especially if you have PTS and that is the worst thing. The
Little
data
kids,
has not. Hey, look, the data has not come out yet in terms of the impacts that these draconian measures have had on our society. By the way, just one, I think I mentioned this on the previous podcast. I have a good friend who up in New Hampshire, who's on the board for a hospital, and one of the doctors on that board said, "You know what? During COVID, we're not getting any child abuse cases anymore. You want to know why? They shut the schools down, and that's where most of the child abuse cases get detected. Where Johnny shows up with a black eye, okay, or a broken arm, or whatever, and that I'm telling you right now, the aftermath and the unintended consequences, or maybe they were intended, is gonna
every,
be it's gonna come out someday. It's gonna come
we're
out, but
gonna talk, a lot of this
let's do that one.
information is out there and we will talk about it.
Yeah.
We'll
Okay.
talk
Good.
about it soon, actually,
So
because
yeah. So
it's a big topic.
We can go on and on, Suzette, with examples. The fact that the Patriot Act got passed during this whole 9/11 thing. Seems like whenever emotions are high, that's where government slips in the cracks and it goes undetected. So we could probably sit here with a lot more examples, but we wanted to talk about flag burning. Not maybe Yeah, okay. We wanted to talk about flag burning from the respect that, why was it why do we feel it was the right call by Scalia and the others that voted against, for our First Amendment rights? But more importantly, though, why the nature of that call was important. As much as Scalia detested flag burners, he still voted the way he did because he believed he probably was the purest originalist we've ever saw on the Supreme Court, and he really did make the right call, in my opinion. There may be people out there listening to this that disagree with us, but you got to check your emotions at the door and say, well, be careful what you ask for. Maybe that's what we should have titled this episode. Be careful what you ask for. You know. Final thoughts
You
for you,
can't,
Suzette?
I agree. I would say, yeah, I agree. I think that he, um, did not want to suppress freedom of expression. And he felt like this man, Mr. Johnson, was expressing himself. And there was no good reason to suppress it. When you suppress speech, things just tend to get worse. They tend to go underground. And now you really don't know what you're dealing with. I mean, this is what happens in a lot of countries. Look at Gaza. That's literally those tunnels. When we think of tunnels, have you ever seen any of those tunnels?
Yeah.
You could drive a Mack truck through these things.
Hmm.
These aren't like when I heard tunnels, I thought, oh, these poor people digging out these dirt tunnels, and I had no idea that they were actually like 40 feet by 40 feet, huge and endless. So you drive people underground when you don't give them a voice, and that is not good. There is no good outcome to that, So I do think that everyone deserves a voice, even if I don't
And
want to.
and you got to remember again, just going back to how our country was founded. You mentioned the Stamp Act, right? And that was sort of the proverbial straw that broke the camel's back. And it took 10 years from that point for us to have the revolution. But I think that was 1765. But anyway, um, once we start chipping away at things like this, we're going to start getting to that point where that straw is going to be placed on our backs and is going to be, well, let's just put it this way, it's not going to be a good time. And I think we're getting to that point pretty soon. So keep the Constitution in mind, even if you favor somebody's move, like, hey, I think Trump really should have put tariffs on China. Good for them, right? We really got him, right? That wasn't his call. Okay. And we can't allow our leaders, we have to hold them in check and not allow our leaders to abridge the Constitution. Okay. I don't care who they are or what the call is. We got to push back on this stuff and let's do it the right way. Go through Congress and let the people decide, right? So anyway, that's the message I think on the flag burning decision. back in, again, 1990, I believe. So there we have it.
Thank you, Mark. This was I think this was a really good topic to discuss in terms of free speech, because we are surrounded by so much censorship these days, politically correct speech, etc. So I think this has been really good.
And speaking of censorship, I got linked out. I was on LinkedIn with thousands and thousands of followers around the world, and I got linked out for two things I said that turned out to be exactly true. So anyway, so much for misinformation. But
I hear you.
okay, Suzette Lawrence, thank you very much. That was excellent. We will catch you next time. Suzette, do we have a episode set up for next time? I think we do. Let me see here what we have here. This was episode 17, and I think 18 we had listed as constitutional clauses, I believe. We're going to talk about the different clauses, and we'll tee one up too. I think I want to get one in there on your perspective on the whole COVID thing and how that really violated our constitutional rights. Christy already did something on that, but I think there's so much more to talk about, right? And I think we need to throw these current issues out there for people to really get to see the tie-in to how the infringements on the Constitution affect them and their daily lives.
I totally agree. That'll be very exciting, because I think it's going to be eye-opening for a lot of people. So we'll leave it there.
Well, get to work, darn it.
Okay.
What are you doing just standing there talking to me? Awesome, Suzette. Thank you. Suzette Lawrence from Sedona, Arizona. Mark DeLuzio from Scottsdale, Arizona. But we're here for America. So God bless you, Suzette. God bless America. And we'll see you next time.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thanks for listening to the Constitution Solution, one podcast under God, where we hold that strict adherence to the Constitution is the solution to most of our country's problems.
You can find other episodes on our website at 1787solution.com, YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and most other platforms. We're your hosts, Mark DeLuzio and Suzette Lawrence. Until next time, may God bless you, and may God bless America.